So first and foremost, this is the introduction. I'm going to introduce Jonathan in a second, who is our lovely London School of Paediatrics head of school. And I am, if you don't know me already, the chair of the London School of Paediatrics Trainee Committee. And today we've put together this event so that we can have a better understanding of what's to come. Next, after my very long-winded introduction, we are going to have a lovely talk from Emma Dyer. Many of you may know her as the RCPCH ePortfolio and Curriculum Trainee Rep. She's basically the queen of Progress Plus and also our lovely curriculum and Kaizen. So she will be going through the college slides and the college take on the whole process of shape of training to give us a better idea of what the stages are going to be. Following that, we are going to do your FAQs. So when you all signed up for tonight, you kindly filled out a questionnaire when you signed up to say what your questions were, what your concerns were, what your interests behind shape of training are. We've gathered all those questions, and there were a lot of them, and we've made an incredible FAQ document, which is still in progress, but will be released tonight. And we're going to go through those questions bit by bit. The people going through those questions are going to be Jonathan. I'm going to be hosting, so I'm going to be the trainee or college tutor who has all the questions that you've asked. Emma, who's going to do some of our questions, Kate Quinnan, who is our London School of Paediatrics Trainee Committee less than full-time subgroup lead. And we also have the support of our amazing TPDs, Shanthi, who will be hopefully helping with some of our program management questions as she's our level 3 TPD, program management TPD. And we've also got Anne. Anne is our deputy head of school, and she also knows everything about ARCP and grid. So they will all be supporting tonight. And right at the end, we'll just have a few announcements and, of course, feedback so we can find out how you found tonight and then go from there. So because I have to let Jonathan do a little bit of talking tonight, I'm going to introduce him now, who will hopefully give us a little bit more insight into the evening before we get on to Emma's talk.
Oh, well, I haven't got much to say, really. I think now I can look at this one. So you don't.
Recording.
Yeah, but
so we're recording tonight as well.
The sound's still going to work if I look this way or this way.
Okay.
So I think the sound will work quite good because we're here stuck in Health Education England headquarters. I think the most important thing to say is actually this doesn't look as bad as it might do. So we've had a lot of very, very kind of like, my goodness, is the world going to fall apart style questions, and there are changes and we do need to be aware of them. But, you know, essentially paediatric training is not going to be massively different. The big difference will be around placements. And so the placement TPDs are working very, very hard at trying to make these logical and smooth on the way through. So I hope after this evening, you'll have a fair idea of what it's going to mean for you and what it's going to mean overall. And we're still, you know, at the process at the moment of changing around the placements so that they will suit the needs of the future program. One thing we don't have time for this evening probably is individual questions, and I'm sure there will be a lot of those. So, you know, if we're kind of sensing, well, the question you've just raised is a really very valid question, but it kind of probably pertains to just you. We might just have to either ignore that if there's a lot of people, or actually request that you take that either to a contact meeting or discuss it with your college tutor or educational supervisor or someone like that. So we're going to try and be as sort of generic as possible, but that's the general idea as we go through. We really hope it's going to be an interesting evening and hopefully reassuring as well. I think the more I find out about Progress Plus, the more reassured I am that it's all going to be okay. All right. We should get going this year with Emma.
Absolutely. So in the interest of time, and because lovely Emma needs to get to her night shift, I'm going to hand it over to her, and she's going to give us some insight into Progress to Progress Plus. Emma, I'm just going to stop sharing now and off you go.
Thanks so much, guys, and thank you, Nisha and Jonathan. Can everyone see these slides?
Yes, we can see the slides.
Perfect. Nisha, just let me know if you can't hear me or if they're not moving on for any reason. So thanks very much for having me. And thank you, Jonathan. I really appreciate the reassuring words, because I know this has caused some worry, but I do think Jonathan's right, and the world is not going to fall apart and it's all going to be fine. So I'm just going to run us through the transition from Progress to Progress Plus. So as I'm sure many of you remember, some of you might not, the lucky ones, in 2018 we moved to the Progress curriculum. Before this, we had a very, very extensive, quite tick box based curriculum with lists and lists of conditions that we needed to see in our training. And we moved away from that to a kind of higher level outcomes based curriculum, which was based on generic professional capabilities. So trying to kind of say what it is that makes a good paediatrician, rather than have you seen 1,000 conditions before you CCT. So this is a capability based training, as we know. And at that time, all the subspecialty curriculum were also aligned to Progress. This kind of paved the way for greater flexibility of working and better aligned to those future ways of working. And Progress Plus really is a kind of extension of this. So it's not a huge change to the curriculum content. We're just kind of moving on a little bit further. So as you've probably seen, but just in case you haven't, I'm going to run through it from a very basic level. The biggest change is the structural change, really. So basically, we're moving from an overall indicative length of training of 8 years to 7 years. Everything I talk about in this presentation, just for ease, is going to be based around trainees going full time and progressing at kind of the normal expected rate of progression summer to summer. I appreciate that is not everyone. In fact, it's probably the minority these days, but I will talk about that at the end. But it's just easier to do it like this for everybody, and then we'll talk about what happens if that's not you at the end. So that's what's happening, 8 to 7 years, and then we're moving from the current 3 levels of training to 2 levels. So we'll be moving to core paediatrics, which will be ST1 to 4, and then specialty paediatrics, which will be ST5 to 7. And I'm going to show you a nice diagram in a second that kind of demonstrates that. And then the other change is kind of with a view to improving flexibility. So we already have a capability rather than a time-based training program, but that's kind of emphasized even more in Progress Plus. There's technically a removal of specific requirements for specific placements. So there will no longer be, you can't progress if you haven't done 6 months in tertiary neonates or 6 months in community child health. Having said that, many trainees will still do those posts, and I think Jonathan will talk more about that later. But it's not that you can't progress if you haven't done it. As long as you can meet the competencies, then that's not a fixed requirement, although I think it will still happen in many cases. There's also some mapping between subspecialties. So there's a possibility that trainees may be able to move between subspecialties and count training. In reality, this is going to impact a small handful of trainees at best, but I'm going to talk a bit more about that later on just to make it clear. And then the other idea is kind of more promotion about program opportunities. Now in London, we're already pretty good at that, but in lots of parts of the country, OOPs are much harder to get. So hopefully that will improve as well. So this is what it will look like. So you can see we've got core paediatrics ST1 to 4, and then specialty paediatrics ST5 to 7. Just to take you through a few of the details. So in core paediatrics, that's when people will be doing their exams. For Progress Plus, you will need to finish your written theory exams by the end of ST3 and your clinical exam by the end of ST4. That's actually what we moved to in COVID. Before that, it was all a year earlier. So we're kind of just keeping what we moved to during kind of COVID when we changed all the requirements, which will give people an extra year based on what they, compared to what they used to have, to get the exams done. The other point to bring out here is that there's an idea that during kind of ST2, probably more really ST3, that trainees will start to transition to tier 2 working. Now, the idea is that this is done in a supportive way. So people start to kind of step up maybe in the daytime when they're on their tier 1 rota in a supported way, supervise, take on a bit more responsibility, and so start to prepare for that tier 2 working. And then during ST3, they may be able to then kind of decide that they're ready to step up and may be able to transition onto a tier 2 rota. This gets a little bit complicated in terms of rota planning. So in reality, what's going to happen, there's going to be a kind of assessment that is done between you and your educational supervisor to determine that you're ready for tier 2 level working. There'll be a form that needs to be run through and a few things that you need to have done to show that. Nothing kind of major or very straightforward things that you would expect to need to be able to do to be a tier 2 doctor. And then once your supervisor and the trainee have both kind of agreed that they are ready and are ready to step up, then you'd be able to go onto a tier 2 rota. Realistically, if you feel in the middle of a job, right, I'm ready to step up to tier 2 working, your supervisor's happy, you've completed the form, you're not suddenly going to be able to move on to a tier 2 rota because you're mid-job. That would leave a gap on the tier 1 rota. They'd have to create a new post on a tier 2 rota. It's just not really going to happen. But perhaps at the next change of job, that will be the opportunity to kind of move on to tier 2 working. But those trainees can start taking on that responsibility within the rota that they're on. And again, that would be in a supported way, which, you know, is a great thing for that transition. So that's kind of core paediatrics. Obviously by ST4, then everyone's on our tier 2 rota as they are now. Then you transition to specialty paediatrics. Now, this is where there's not really masses of difference, to be honest. So as is now, some trainees will go into general paediatrics, and that will stay at about 70%, which is the current kind of split. And then maybe about 30% will go into subspecialties. And that will still be applied for via the same subspecialty application process, also known as GRID. That's not changing. It will be the same kind of, you need to be appointed and have a post. And there will still be spins available. Again, at the moment, they are not changing. The spins that are currently available will be the ones that will be available then. And you'll apply for those kind of in the same way as you do now. You can see these arrows between subspecialties. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. There's possibility to perhaps move between them a little bit. And then there will be the START assessment that will happen in ST6 rather than ST7 because everything is a year shorter. But specialty paediatrics is still 3 years as it is now. So that's not really changing. Obviously then, hopefully we finish and CCT, happy days. So just to mention OOPS, again, these are not really changing in themselves. This is still all governed by the Gold Guide, which you can find online, and all the kind of rules and how OOPS work are all in there. And that will be the same. So you can still apply for these at any point, and it will have to be approved as it is now. There's obviously a kind of very obvious gap between core paediatrics and specialty paediatrics where people might choose to take an OOP, and I think it's anticipated that some people will want to do that, but you could apply for it at any time like you do now, as long as it's subject to all the kind of rules in the Gold Guide and it's approved by your school. So I've mentioned this a couple of times. Like I said before, this is not going to affect many people probably, but just to make you aware. So there is going to be some potential for trainees to move between a subspecialty to another subspecialty. And if there is shared curricular content between those subspecialties, there may be the opportunity to carry that learning across because it's capability based. So if you've met those capabilities that are shared between the two subspecialties, they can count if you move into a different subspecialty. However, this would still need to be subject to the normal appointment process. So that trainee would still need to reapply for the different subspecialty via the application process, the GRID process, and be appointed. And it's likely that that will be limited to the first year of subspecialty training, because realistically, once you've gone beyond that, you're becoming kind of too subspecialized. So you wouldn't be able to then, that learning would then not be relevant for the other subspecialty in terms of transferring learning across. So there's been a mapping exercise done, which you won't probably be able to read this, and it's a bit complex, but basically they've looked at the curricula for all the different subspecialties and worked out where the overlaps are. So the green boxes are where there's significant overlap of content. So for example, if you were doing child mental health and you wanted to move to community child health, there's quite a lot of overlap there. So you may be able to carry some of that learning across, which would mean you would need to do less time in the second subspecialty, all provided that you obviously were appointed to that subspecialty when you applied. The yellow boxes is where there's some overlap, so you may be able to carry across some learning, and then the grey boxes, there's not really any overlap. So if you were to move into a different subspecialty, you wouldn't be able to carry across any learning and you kind of start from scratch. So like I said, that's likely not to apply to many people, but it is there for those people that it might be helpful for. So then we go on to how this is actually going to work in terms of transitioning from the current progress curriculum and progress training pathway to Progress Plus. So this is an overview, and I'm going to run through exactly what it means for each year of training just in a sec. Basically, at the beginning and the end of training is pretty straightforward. So if you're currently in ST1, when in summer 2023, if you're in ST1 about at the changeover we're about to have, if you're finishing ST1 in summer 2023, then you move into ST2 on Progress Plus and you carry on, and that works the same for ST2 and 3. If you're already in specialty training, so ST6, 7 and 8, you will move seamlessly into the new specialty training, continuing with what you're doing currently. If you're in ST5, when the change comes in, you will also move into specialty training, but starting that. The tricky bit comes if you are going to be finishing ST4 in summer 2023, and those trainees will have an element of choice as to what they do when the change comes in. And I'm going to talk about that in more detail, so don't panic. So basically, if you're finishing ST1 in summer 2023, you will move into core training as an ST2 in Progress Plus. Your CCT date will be 2029, obviously assuming you're full-time, you don't take time out. As we've seen, you have to get all your written done by the end of ST3, all your written exams that is, and clinical by the end of ST4, and you'll transition to middle grade working probably during ST3 once everybody's happy with that. Pretty similar for those who are finishing ST2 in summer 2023, just a year on, so you'll move into core training as an ST3 and progress through as we've seen in the diagrams and we've talked about already. If you're finishing ST3 in summer 2023, you will move into core training as an ST4, which means you'll be on a tier 2 rota. You will have needed to have passed all your written by then, and you'll have an extra year to get the clinical done at that point. So for these trainees, what would be really good, and I know this already happens in plenty of places, is that during the ST3 year, they start looking for opportunities to kind of act up in their current job, be supported in middle grade working, getting experience, taking on that responsibility, so that by the time they transition to ST4 with Progress Plus, they feel ready to take on that tier 2 working. So this is when it gets a little more complex, not too complex, but just a little. So trainees who are finishing ST4 in summer 2023 will obviously have needed to have passed their clinical by the end of that year and will have been working on a middle grade rota for a year at that point. These trainees then have a choice about what they do. And this is why it's really important that people start thinking about this now and have discussions early with their supervisors and their TPDs to kind of work out what they want their career pathway to look like. So these trainees can either choose to remain in core training, so in that first 4-year block of the new Progress Plus pathway. That will mean their indicative CCT date will be 2027, and they will then move into specialty training the following summer in August, September 2024. Or these trainees can move straight into specialty training, either in general paediatrics or in a subspecialty. That would obviously mean applying for subspecialty training and being appointed, and they would be applying this year in the 2022-2023 application round, which will open at the end of this year. And that's why one of the reasons why it's so important to start thinking about this now, because if you are planning to apply for subspecialty this year, then obviously you want to start thinking about that application sooner rather than later. And those trainees then would have an indicative CCT date a year earlier in 2026. So why might people choose to do either of these options? So trainees may choose to remain in core training. These trainees basically were expecting to have an ST5 year, which is effectively the year that's going. So they may want to still do that year as they were expecting to do, in which case, fine, absolutely fine. They can stay in core training and do that extra year. This also might give trainees more time to prepare for subspecialty applications if that's what they want to do. So some people might choose to do it for that. The other thing, which is really important, is that trainees can only progress to specialty training if they have met all the current level 2 capabilities to show they're ready to progress. So the current level 2 being the current progress curriculum, they will need to have met all of those before they can progress to specialty training. So if they haven't met those capabilities, then they'll need to stay in core training for that extra year to get the capabilities, which is absolutely fine. Some trainees might decide to move into specialty training at this point. Those trainees will need it, as I said, to have completed all their level 2 capabilities. So if that's something that you're thinking about doing, you need to know this now so that you can make sure that in that ST4 year, you get all your level 2 capabilities completed, evidenced on Kaizen and kind of signed off. Those trainees may feel they're ready to progress, so they want to go straight into specialty training. And they might also have been appointed to a subspecialty training pathway when they apply this year, and they just want to move in and take up that post, which is fine. So that's kind of the choice, and that's why we need to start thinking about this early. Just as a note, and this is really important, if you're thinking of applying for subspecialty this application round this year for this transition, you will find out whether or not you've been appointed before you have to make the final decision about whether you want to remain in core training or move into specialty training. So you could apply, and if you weren't appointed, you could then choose to remain in core training, and then you can apply the following year. So after this, it gets a bit more straightforward again. Everyone can breathe a sigh of relief. So if you're finishing ST5 in summer 2023, you will move into specialty training. And again, that will either be general paediatrics or subspecialty training. So it also means these trainees, if you want to apply for subspecialty training, will need to be applying in this application round as well. And we're going to talk more about grid/subspecialty applications in the FAQs, because I know that that is a big area of concern for people. So we're going to go through that in some more detail and talk about this slight bottleneck in the FAQs shortly. These trainees, again, will have an indicative CCT date of 2026. And as we've talked about, there may be some flexibility in moving between subspecialty pathways in the first year of that training. If you're finishing ST6 in summer 2023, you're already in your specialty training. You will just carry on in that, and your CCT date will be as it was, because specialty training is still 3 years. And the same for those in ST7. Just as one little point, if you're someone who is towards the end of your training, so if you're in or starting ST8 when this transition comes in, and you're going to CCT before the 15th of September 2024, those trainees have the option to remain on Progress. They don't have to transition to Progress Plus. They can if they want to, but they have the option to remain on Progress. But after the 15th of September 2024, everyone will have had to move across. So if you're not going to CCT till after that, you'll need to transition to Progress Plus. If you're finishing ST8, happy days, you're going to CCT, you don't need to worry about this. So just a couple of points about ARCPs. In summer 2023, so just before the transition, ARCPs will be as they are now, judged against the current Progress level 1, 2 and 3 curricula. There will be hopefully special consideration for those who are ST4 who want to finish their level 2 training to progress into specialty, like we talked about, and otherwise they'll kind of run as they do now. After summer 2023, ARCPs will then be judged against the new Progress Plus core and specialty curricula, apart from those ST8s who have chosen to remain on Progress like we spoke about. There's the college has the kind of plan that there'll be a slightly light touch ARCP for ST4s completing core in 2024. So those are the ST4s who will have been on the core curriculum of Progress Plus, but just for a year, because they'll have needed to get all those competencies done in that year. However, just to reassure everyone, the curriculum is not massively changing. It's just been restructured from 3 levels into 2. So a lot of the key capabilities that you need to evidence are exactly the same. There's a slight change of emphasis, but the content is not massively different. And they're already available on the college website, so you can have a look and reassure yourself that it's not massively changing. It's pretty much the same, just slightly restructured. There's more emphasis on things like child mental health, public health and integrated health, but that's stuff that we're already doing on our day-to-day jobs all the time. The other thing to just reassure you about is that no learning will be lost. So things that you are tagging now and evidencing to your curriculum will all be transferred over to the new Progress Plus curricula. So all that learning that you've done won't be lost. So actually, there's not going to be huge amounts more or different that people will need to do. There's a good video on the college website from Steve Bagan-Witt, who is in the training services team, talking about how they're going to do that. So, and just reassuring trainees that their learning is not going anywhere and it will all be there and mapped to Progress Plus. So I'm almost done. Just to draw your attention to this before I finish. So this document, Paediatrician of the Future, has kind of been written to go alongside Progress Plus. And it's actually a really good document if anyone is bored and wants something to read. It's a really aspirational document talking about how we can really deliver really good training for our paediatric trainees. There are 11 training principles in it outlining that training, and the college has been running a Training Principle of the Month series this year. All those resources are on the website. There's loads of great ideas on there about how we can really give good training to our trainees and some really kind of out of the box and innovative ideas. This is designed to go with Progress Plus, and I think this is a really good opportunity for us to look at how we train our paediatric trainees and improve it. And there's almost no point in changing the structure of it if we're not improving the training. So this document's kind of, I guess, aimed more at educational supervisors and schools and that kind of thing. But there's loads of stuff in there that trainees can learn from and draw out as well. So it's worth having a little look at. So next steps, we're going to talk more in the FAQs, I think, as well about a lot of this. But if you are a trainee, especially if you're going to be in that kind of transition group in the ST4s who need to make that decision, have early conversations, start talking to your supervisors now about what you want to do, have a look at the curriculum, get familiar with that, make sure you're happy things aren't massively changing. You can start looking for those opportunities in child mental health and public health already, and you can start putting that on your portfolio, and that will all get pulled across to Progress Plus. And if you're wanting to consider entering subspecialty training in 2023, then you need to start looking at your applications, because that will be the application window that opens at the end of this year. If you're a college tutor, please get the message out there. I mean, hopefully this is reaching lots of people, but if people haven't made this or aren't sure about it, please tell people about Progress Plus, get them to think about their personal kind of career pathway and what is going to impact them, how it's going to affect them. Make sure that all those trainees who are going to be finishing ST4 in summer 2023 have been identified and they know they need to think about this, and that they start having early conversations with their supervisors about this. Promote the Paediatrician of the Future document and the Principle of the Month, get people talking about that. And also, if you've got trainees who are coming into their ST3 year, supporting them to step up and take responsibility and gain experience in middle grade working would be great. And then schools, I know Jonathan is already all over this, but they are looking at all of this stuff. They're looking at the placements, how Progress Plus is going to affect that, reviewing kind of supervision. So Progress Plus is really promoting the idea of longitudinal supervision where it's possible, finding those opportunities to work with CAMS and public health and all that kind of stuff. So that is all happening. So just in case you hadn't heard me say summer 2023 about 4 million times, it's coming in summer 2023. Please don't forget, please start thinking about it. There is loads of stuff about this that you can access. So as Nisha said, there's going to be a kind of LSP specific FAQ document going around, which is going to be full of really good information. There's also loads of stuff on the college website. So there's a specific Progress Plus landing page. On there, there is a document called Progress Plus and Me, which goes through basically what I've done, but in more detail. So what it means for every level of training and what it's going to mean for you. There's also a very comprehensive FAQ document on the website, which goes through some of the more niche things. So what it means for trainees who are less than full time or clinical fellows or whatever. So there's loads of stuff on there as well. They also have a dedicated email address at the college, which is up on the screen. So they will take any questions. So if you've got a particularly kind of niche situation with your career, or you're on statutory leave or whatever, and you're not sure how it's going to affect you and you can't get an answer from anybody, email them because they'll be able to help. Just to mention, like I said, we've talked lots about people who are progressing through it full time. Obviously, a lot of people are not full time. They are less than full time. They're on UPs, they're on statutory leave. So this can all be tailored to each individual circumstance. Just need to have early conversations with your supervisors and TPDs about how it's going to affect you. There's one last point that I want to make that I was going to make earlier and I totally forgot, and then I'm done. So just to say, because this is quite important, these trainees who, say if you're finishing ST5 in summer 2023, you will be expecting to become an ST6, and ST6, as we know, comes with a pay progression point. Now, technically on Progress Plus, you're finishing your core effectively, and you'll be going into specialty, which on Progress Plus is ST5. So you could become ST5 again, but the problem is if that happens, you might miss out on that ST6 pay progression. The college is very, very clear on this. Their position is that no trainee will miss out on their pay progression because of Progress Plus. So that might mean that we have to just think about the naming of what we call these trainees. There is currently ongoing discussions with HEE to work out exactly what trainees will be named who are transitioning in this period. Eventually it won't matter because everyone will have worked through on Progress Plus and it will be fine. But in this transition, there may have to be slightly two naming systems going on to make sure that nobody misses out on their pay progression. So watch this space for what it will actually be. Those discussions are ongoing, but I just wanted to reassure people that no one will miss out on the pay progression because of Progress Plus and being called something that they're kind of not really. So don't worry about that. It's going to get sorted. Yeah, we don't know exactly what the system will be yet. And that is me done, I think. So we're going to do questions now. I'm going to hand back to Nisha and hopefully stop sharing my screen.
Right, we're interrupting each other because we're so keen. So thanks so much, Emma. And Jonathan also expresses his thanks, and we were nodding at each other because the pay question at the end is one of the ones that we didn't have a direct answer for, as we knew that it was still with the college. So it's really good to hear that one of the questions that we are going to address later has already been answered, which is lovely to hear. And I think that was...
Hang on, it's sort of been answered.
Well, sort of been answered. We know it's in hand. We don't know exactly how it's going to work, but no one is going to be affected, which is great. So hopefully the college will come to some sort of conclusion and let us know.
It's got some stuff on the chat as well. Thanks, Rosie, for pointing out the issue might affect people at ST4 as well. But the essence is that every year you move forward in your training, and so you get a pay uplift every single year as you move forward, no matter how that sits across the time of this transition to the new curriculum. So exactly how that happens looks like it's just a little bit difficult to work out at this stage, but we've got a whole year to sort this out, and seeing how far we've actually come in the last few months, I've got no doubt whatsoever this will be fine.
Right, guys, so next is the all-important FAQs. So there's a lovely QR code here. This QR code is going to take you to our FAQ documents, okay? So as I explained in the beginning, all your questions that you asked have all been populated on here, on this one document. Please bear with us because there are some grammar and spelling mistakes because I haven't had time to go through everything, but lovely Jonathan has answered all the questions alongside Emma, myself, and lots of other people as well who have looked through this, including Ruth, and I believe Anne is also doing some. So I hope all of you are able to get onto the FAQ document from this. Don't worry if you can't, because it will be sent out, it will be put on the website, and it will be available to everyone, and I will get HEE to send it out to all London trainees as well. But you should be able to access it. we're going to do the questions now in a bit of a funny order, but it is consistent with the document, and it's just because Emma has to dash off to her night shift and she's going to answer some of our questions for us through all of her knowledge, because I know I have lots of questions. So I am going to be your trainee, college tutor, educational supervisor and TPD right now with all the questions in the world. Okay, so let's get started.
Can we just note how together Emma's looking? I don't know how you're managing
pre-night
that.
shift. Middle of night shifts, and she was messaging us until about 10:30, I think.
No,
so she's not set very much.
Quite relieved, I'd have thought, to actually get back to where you're working.
So guys, let's get started. So the first thing we're going to do is look at ARCP competencies and exams. So I am going to ask these questions to lovely Emma and Anne, I believe. So hopefully Anne can turn her camera on as well, and we should be able to see a couple of you. So the first question I have is, how will this affect linking competencies on Kaizen?
So you kindly described Kaizen as lovely earlier, which is the first time I've ever heard anyone use that. But basically, it's all going to be fine. So anything you're tagging currently to your key capabilities on Kaizen will all be pulled across. The college have done lots of mapping and make sure that it's going to all come across to the Progress Plus curriculum. As I said, there's a good video on the website from the training services team about how that will work if you're worried, and to hopefully reassure you. But you will link in exactly the same way as you do now. The competencies are going to look very similar to what they do now, just restructured, like I said, into 2 levels rather than 3, and everything should pull across.
And I think that answers my second question. Will our core competencies change with the new curriculum? So guys, Emma's kindly answered that for us, and for more details, she also said that the Progress Plus curriculum is already on the website, for which the link is there. And also, whilst Emma was having a chat with us, I've put the link in the chat, so please have a look at that. Our next questions are, what, if any, difference would there be for trainees who have winter ARCP?
So this will kind of depend on where trainees are in their training pathway. If you're not at a major transition point, most trainees will then just be able to transition onto the appropriate grades that they currently are really in Progress Plus, and they can carry on. Things won't be massively different. As we said, the curriculum is pretty similar. They'll just carry on linking and they can have their summer ARCP. There may be trainees who are kind of near a transition point who might need to have summer ARCPs depending on what they want to do. So if you were like halfway through ST5, for example, you may want to carry on and finish the next 6 months, in which case you would need to stay in core training. Or you may just say, actually, I've got all my competencies, I would like to actually move on to specialty training, in which case you would need an ARCP to show that you've met those competencies and that you can move into specialty training without doing the next 6 months of that ST5 year. So I think that is why it's really important to have early conversations with your supervisors and your TPDs about what you want to do, so that if you are someone who might need to have an extra ARCP in the summer or something like that, people know about that early so they can plan for it. I don't know whether Anne wants to come in with any kind of points on that from a London point of view.
No, that's exactly the situation. As Jonathan said earlier on when we were having this discussion, we already have about 250, 300 trainees that have winter ARCP. So next year we will need to put in, and we actually started from this ARCP where we started to identify particular trainees, but we need to kind of step up with the winter ARCPs and be ready to do additional ARCP reviews. I like the term light touch, really just focusing on the important aspects of training that need to be evidenced to move.
Amazing, thank you. So what are the community sign-off requirements for ST4?
It's a good question, but as we said before, the curriculum content is not really changing. So basically it'll be as it is now on the curriculum. There's not a specific ST4 sign off, but if you look at the curriculum for the core paediatrics, that's what you'll have to get done by the end of ST4. And within that, there are some capabilities that are maybe more aligned to getting done whilst you're in community, but you can get them done at any point. As long as you're showing you're meeting those competencies, it doesn't matter how or where, but there are some that are obviously easier to get when you're in community, but it's not hugely changing and the curriculum is there to see.
Which is just on the link below and also in the chat, as we mentioned before. So the next question, which I'm going to direct to lovely Jonathan, is when do I have to complete my clinical exams by, and also my written exams?
Okay, so this is very straightforward. In fact, it's pretty much the same as what we had been doing for the last couple of years. So you have to complete all of your written exams before you transition into ST4 and have to have completed your clinical exam before you can go into ST5. So these are core things that have to be sorted. Of course, we advise them to be actually done well before that. And in fact, as many would have found, it's really useful having done all that kind of book work and preparing for the clinical exams for your training anyway. So that's when those are by.
Thanks. So guys, that's the end of our ARCP section. Next is grid and spin.
I hope you're liking Nisha's organisation. By the way, it's all colour coded. I don't know if you spotted this.
Yeah, so
Depending
sorry
on which colour it goes into different people.
Yeah, so that's why there's loads of weird colours around, because it helps me know who I'm directing my question to. I hope you are enjoying my really bad acting at the moment. So grid and spin, these are going to be to amazing Anne and Emma again. So question number 1. Will subspeciality be possible or spin style augmentation to the portfolio for those keen to subspecialise in non-clinical areas such as management, education and quality improvement?
I love that idea. At the moment, as I said, the spins are as they are, but it's a cool idea. Take it to someone, see what we can make happen. But yeah, at the moment, the spins, we haven't redone them. They're as they are now. So, and same with subspecialties as they are now.
I'll probably just add to that.
I don't think it really matters too much what you call it. You can actually develop your own expertise, and it would just be amazing, and then build up your own individual portfolio. I think people focus too much on, we've always had trainees have specialist interest in subspecialties or areas, education, research, that kind of thing. It's just that someone called it a spin. And now people are focusing on the rules and processes around that. But really, you just develop your own individual your portfolio of experiences and competences and capabilities and stuff that you've done. And as long as you actually walk the talk, it'll be fine, but no matter what you call it.
Also, I think the college probably is going to stick to doing what it actually does well, which is clinical training and clinical stuff, rather than some of these other things where there are lots of other organisations that probably can accredit and teach things like management skills, QI much better, like say the King's Fund, or there's a lot of different organisations that could do that. There are already qualifications, PG certs, MSCs, etc., that are put on, and so if you want to go down this route, probably that's where to go, rather than waiting for the college to put on a spin.
Amazing, thank you very much. So how many times can I apply for grid training?
So that's changed recently. There is no upper limit now on how many times you can apply. You have to have enough time left in your training. That's the key thing. But there's no upper limit on how many times you can apply. So potentially if people have taken years out and stuff, they might be able to apply a few more times, but they have to have enough time left in their training to do the subspecialty.
Amazing, great
And
news.
And it's also important to recall or to remember alongside that you can only count 12 months whole-time equivalent of retrospective grid or subspecialty, previous subspecialty experience. So in a way that kind of limits you, particularly if you're going for a 3-year subspecialty training program like neonates, neurology, which is actually a bit more than that, and lots of the sort of craft subspecialties. But subspecialties like PEM and nephrology that are 2 years, you might be able to then still access it after SD7 or within SD7. So it's important to think about that.
So lots of thinking to do for all those trying to apply to grid. Start thinking about your planning.
But also like, talk about it, because there's advice, there's different ways of playing things, and I think it's quite difficult. I think in our contact meetings, I probably Andy would agree with this, and Shanti as well. quite a few trainees are actually basically saying, look, this is where I'm trying to go in my training. How can I make this happen? What are my different routes through this? And so we try and help people navigate, because it's quite complicated.
Definitely agree there, after just having had a contact meeting about my grid with Anne, actually, about my situation. So lots of pre-thinking, be really detailed on your matching forms, which will still exist as well, which is what Anne told me to do, so that they know and they can try their best to sort things out for us. So next questions. So the big one, the bottleneck, which there are lots and lots of questions about the bottleneck. And for those of you who haven't heard about Shape of Training until today, or haven't done much reading, you're probably thinking exactly the same thing. I'm not going to read all the questions, but I will just summarize. So the question is how are the bottlenecks for grid training applications and post going to be managed? Are the number of grid posts expected to change, increase? We've got a little summary answer from Jonathan. That's why it's in purple. Purple is Jonathan down on the bottom there, but I will leave it to them to answer this question.
Okay, so I'll start off. So bottleneck, yeah, this is a major concern to a lot of people. So if you actually do the numbers, it sounds like basically we've got roughly 100 people in each year in the London school. So it sounds like we will be getting all the people who would normally be going from ST5 into ST6 in the olden days, plus those who are now going from ST4 to subspec training, i.e. 100, all suddenly arriving in subspecialist training all at the same time. That sounds terrible, doesn't it? It's mitigated by a large number of things. First of all, we know about it, which is really helpful. Secondly, we're not actually changing the number of trainees in the system in the pot, nor are we changing the number of posts. And we've always flexibly used our so-called old school level 3 and old school level 2 posts somewhat interchangeably. So that's going to mitigate it. Plus, we've also got this kind of, you can delay a year should you wish to. So in fact, I don't think the bottleneck's going to be anywhere near as bad as had been anticipated. I think one of the problems might be for people who are trying to get into a particular grid, because there will definitely be more applications for the number of places available in the next couple of years. Perhaps, Anne, you'd like to kind of expand about that aspect of things.
Yeah. I mean, the competition ratio goes up for certain subspecialties, probably all of them actually. And I suppose the concern that I'm getting as grid TPD are from trainees who probably only have one more go. Because if you're ST3 going into ST4 next month, you can start to apply now. You can apply again next year, and you can decide to actually stay as an ST5 and have another year and have another go, and then have a go at ST6. And if it's a 2-year subspecialty, have another go. You can go out of program and have another go. But for trainees who have maxed out their opportunities, that probably and who are wanting to stay in a specific geographical location, I think that really then it's a very small minority of trainees. But we have in line with the college tried to maximize the number of posts. I've been working with the other program management TPDs, every 3 TPDs, to have a few more posts left over for grid, because as Jonathan says, we've been able to flex between subspecialty posts in London. We're incredibly blessed in London to have a lot of these posts. That there will be lots of issues in the country, and it's also worth remembering that the grid is a national training program, so we're not training just for London, we're training for the country. So I have just submitted, or rather in the process of submitting, grid posts for the next year, and we're maximizing as much as we can. But we're also saying to some trainees, maybe this is the opportunity to go out of program and get some, explore the subspecialty in detail, get some of those capabilities that, whilst won't count in terms of time, will count in terms of capabilities, because you hit the ground running where you get your grid and you demonstrate them. It also makes you wonder, or rather realize, if this is a subspecialty for you, because you may like a subspecialty, but the reality of doing it at level at a senior level may be different from when you did it as an SD2, for instance. So I think Jonathan is right. It's not as bad as as you know, people anticipate, but there will be a little bit of bottlenecks, and we have to be creative and perhaps patient about getting into subspecialty training, and not worry too much if you don't get in the first time, because there are lots of opportunities, and the school will support you with that.
Great.
Thanks, guys.
That
Can
was-
I just come in, Nisha, on
yes, absolutely you can.
Sorry.
I'm going to have to rush a little bit with time, but yes, Emma, please do just
a couple of other points from the college point of view. So yeah, I completely agree with what Jonathan and Anne have said. The bottleneck is not going to be as bad as I think some people are worrying about. Just to say, because I get asked this a lot, people say, why can't they just make some more posts? The number of training posts is set by Health Education England. The college have no control over that. The number of posts, as Jonathan said, are staying the same. And there is possibility of repurposing some posts, like they said, for grid. Just on that, there's been lots of meetings with the CSACs, and what they are doing is sort of looking at which subspecialties are kind of expanding, because what the college want to make sure is that if people are getting subspecialty posts, that there are consultant jobs at the end of it. There's no point giving loads of people subspecialty posts because, you know, that's what they want to do, and then they get to the end of training and can't get a consultant job. So it has to be kind of modelled to the workforce as well. And it's not fair on trainees either to go through a subspecialty training and then not be able to get a job at the end of it. So it's being mapped with the CSACs. The other thing, just in terms of reassuring people, obviously there'll be people applying for subspecialty with a year less experience than previously. The CSACs are well aware of that, and they are looking for people with the potential and the kind of keenness for the subspecialty. They're not looking for fully fledged, you know, already qualified subspecialty consultants. So just to reassure people who are worried about a year less experience, that is something the CSACs are fully aware of, and it's much more about your potential, not about, you know, how many trillions of fellow jobs you've done or whether you've got PhDs and that kind of thing. Yeah, but otherwise that was all I wanted to add.
Great, thank you so much, Emma. I think, Jonathan, did you want to add anything quickly?
I was going to bring in Shanti actually. Shanti's going to be looking after the subspec generalist program for North London in the New World. I mean, I don't know if you just wanted to come back and talk a little bit about how you're going to be managing the extra numbers of trainees that will be in there for the next couple of years.
Sure, yes, thank you, Jonathan. So I guess what we're talking about is trying to think about how we place trainees during matching to really keep your options open. So we're expecting the current status of about 70% of trainees in the subspecialty program staying as generalists. But the new curriculum with its slight emphasis change will mean that you'll probably get 18 months of a general paediatric DGH type post to support sort of the emphasis on integrated care, child mental health, public health, etc. But what we're trying to do between myself and Atafa, who is the other level 3 program management TPD, is that we're trying to place you for either 12 or 24 months, depending on what your stated interests are, to give you that flexibility in terms of thinking about grid or whether you don't want to do grid, and really trying to keep your flexibility open. It does mean that you'll match again in the next round, but that really does open up your choices and gives you as much flexibility as possible. Amazing. But it also means that you won't have your full 3 years mapped up, but it's a bit of a balance between the two.
Thanks so much, Shanti, and we're going to hear a little bit more about level 3 a little bit later. So hopefully we can, I think one of those questions was about future planning if we don't have the full 3 years, but I'll get back to you about that one. So thanks so much about the bottleneck. I definitely feel a bit reassured and hope that it will all pan out. So our next section is pay and rota. So this one, I think Emma kind of went into the details about this, but the first thing we're going to talk about is rota. So will there be a large gap in SHO and middle grade rotas, and how are these going to be addressed in London? Won't there be a year where we lack SHOs? Jonathan?
That's a really interesting question, isn't it, this one? So if you do the maths on it, it looks as though you lose half a year's worth of SHOs every for half of the year. Okay, so if everybody started at exactly the same time and carried on exactly the same time and progressed at exactly the same rate, halfway through the, like in March in like the ST3 years, suddenly there would be this kind of sudden loss of what we used to call SHOs. So we'll call them tier 1 people now. And then there'll be this sudden glut of tier 2 people. However, of course, you have to remember that at the same time, we're actually losing some people from the tier 2 because they're effectively going into consultantdom slightly early, a year early. So that's what should happen. But of course, life is not like that at all. And it's all muddied up by the fact that actually we have less than full-time people coming out, coming in. And so there's nowhere near going to be that kind of sudden impact in that same way. We probably won't even hardly notice the difference between the first half of the year when there's slightly more tier 1 people around and the second where there should be slightly less. This is particularly mitigated by the fact that this is an area where hospitals have already put other people on those particular rotas. So we've got GP trainees, for instance, FY2s, PAs, AMPs, all sorts of different people are actually coming into that rota, which is exactly what should really have been happening over about the last 10 years. So this should be a sort of transition phase for our trainee paediatricians as they get to the more meaty bits of the training in the back half of the training, when we're really trying to get you through to being very kind of senior and wise in decision and experience. So we don't think there'll be a huge impact on that. So it's a small drop of around sort of, perhaps it's going to look like about a sixth, which will make a difference, and you will notice it on the floor, but it won't be massive difference. I hope that answers the question there.
Amazing. So I think also Jonathan's answered the next question about what is the rota impact. So I'm going to move on to the next one. Lots of thinking to do about rotas. If the rota has an SHO and an SPR rota, how will decisions be made about the role of an ST3 before they start a rotation? A very good question. Emma, I'm going to ask you this one.
So I kind of mentioned this a bit in the presentation before, but there's going to be a readiness for tier 2 assessment that will happen between an educational supervisor and a trainee, probably within ST3 for most people, but that's a bit flexible depending on the trainee. And there's a few things that will need to be evident to show that this trainee is ready to step up. The trainee also will be kind of in agreement, and the supervisor will also provide an assessment of like having seen them working to make sure that everyone's happy, this person is ready for tier 2 working. So that's how the decision will be made. And then, as we said before, depending on rotas and where people are in jobs, that will depend on when they actually formally go on to a tier 2 rota, but they can start acting up and taking on that responsibility within the rota that they're in, if that works for the department.
Amazing, thank you. So that's what we should be aspiring to. Do our TPDs feel that that's how it will occur?
Well, we don't know. I mean, it's going to be really interesting to see. I'm not probably interested is the wrong word, because this is people's lives, isn't it? That we're dealing with here, you know, working lives, and also actually the effectiveness of the unit. We've had really a similar situation where we've had some trainees who, for various reasons, have had to come off nights. And this is, I think, perhaps the closest situation where we've had to ask the local team to make wise decisions about how a trainee works. You know, what local trust, college tutors, we've got quite a few in this meeting here. The last thing they want to do is put a trainee into a situation where they are out of their depth, because that's just, you know, terrible for the unit, let alone, you know, the patients that are involved and the trainee there as well. So there should be we're expecting kind of quite a lot of common sense that's going to be actually happening on the ground as college tutors and educational supervisors work with trainees in that. Now, that said, I think another important thing is actually one never really feels terribly ready for transitions. One of the really interesting questions we actually had in the FAQs was someone was saying, well, look, you know, in an age where actually we're feeling less confident than ever, and the question went on after that, And it's really interesting because, you know, confidence isn't something that kind of grows on a tree or you can get a bolus of it. You know, actually it's something that develops over time. And the main way that you really develop confidence is being in a situation where you find actually you did cope. And actually sometimes you actually have to be slightly out of your depth to realize that you can swim. So there will never be a situation where everyone feels completely happy with every aspect. You know, every time I go and do a shift as a consultant pediatric intensivist, there's a bit of, you know, I wonder if I'll have everything, that I'll know everything what to do today. I still feel that a tiny bit, and mostly it's all right. So I think, you know, it's an interesting transition, and we'll again have to work with lots of trainees and educational supervisors to see how this works out and support where that's needed.
So our next question, which I'm going to direct to Jonathan. So this is about pay, which to be fair, Emma has already answered for us. But the big question, will senior decision maker status continue to be at ST6 or will it be moved down to ST5? Will the pay increase that is currently at the old ST6 move to the new ST5, thus reflecting the start of specialty training?
I'm going to refer you back to Emma. Actually, Emma answered this
which
question
she
much
answered
better
very well.
And she's still here.
Yeah. So. So Emma, do you want to just repeat what you said earlier for those who've just joined us or didn't pay attention?
Yeah, of course. So just to say firstly that the pay is not paediatric specific. This is across all specialties. So the ST6 pay point is at ST6. We can't move that. That is not up to us. So that will still be at ST6. The complicating thing is that for trainees who say are completing ST5 before Progress Plus and then moving into the new specialty training, which technically is now ST5, we probably can't call them ST5 twice because they may miss that pay progression point. The college are talking to HEE about what those trainees will be called, and we don't have an answer yet. But the college are, their kind of line is that they do not want any trainee to miss out on that pay progression. So there will be a solution as to what people are called so that people don't miss out on that pay progression point. So if you're expecting the ST6 pay progression, you will still get that. You just might be called something slightly complicated or different, but it's to get around that so that you will still get paid your ST6 pay. But the pay progression point is at ST6. That is not PED specific and we can't move that.
I think the general principle is that each year of successful training you become a more useful doctor to the NHS and therefore should be paid more.
Great, so that's a really good clarity there, which is lovely. Thank you very much. So our next question, which I think follows on from this, is if you want us to step up early in ST3, will we be paid as registrars? So for those of you who don't know, I can actually answer this question. Go on. As an ST3, as per the contract, you are paid as a reg, as the same as what an ST4 and ST5 would be paid as. So don't worry about that. It's a great little step up when you're an ST3 for pay wise. It's when I bought my flat, so it was great. So next, guys, supervision. So for all of you educational supervisors and college tutors out there, I know that there are lots of questions from you as to how best to support your trainees. So we're going to go through these now. Emma, I think this one is for you. So during level 3, if the number of generalists is going to increase significantly, will specialist consultants still be taking on solo ES roles, or will more trainees require a dual educational supervisor and a clinical supervisor approach to their training? For example, previously, say a cardiologist would do, so that would be enough. Will trainees now require a generalist and a cardiologist?
So firstly, I don't think really the number of generalists is going to increase significantly. So the proportion of people going into general paediatrics and subspecialty, the proportion is going to be the same. So I don't think we're going to get like a huge increase in generalists suddenly. Progress Plus talks about more longitudinal supervision. That is something that will obviously schools and locally will need to work out if that's feasible. But the idea would be, in an ideal world, that people hopefully would have one educational supervisor for their core paediatrics and then potentially another supervisor for their specialty paediatrics. But that obviously you also would need a clinical supervisor if your educational supervisor was not someone who was seeing you work clinically, as is the case now. So I don't think this is going to be a big problem. I don't really think we're going to suddenly get millions more generalists. I think it will all even out.
Amazing. So in the interest of time, I'm going to have to speed up a little bit. So less acting from me and more just asking questions. So there is a suggestion TPDs meet with ST4s who have a choice on which way to go. Do we arrange that, or will that be contacted? Will they be contacted when the time comes?
Well, it's a good
Jonathan.
question. I think it'd be lovely to talk to everyone every year really in detail about where their career's going. We've got about 1,200 trainees in London. There's 30 TPD, well, it's not, there's 26 TPDs. It's not practical. However, there's lots of really, really wise people around the patch. You know, our fleet of college tutors is amazing these days, and the quality of education supervisor is pretty high as well. If you can't get an answer out of those, then 100%. That's why we've got these contact meetings that are set in there. The college has actually said that people should meet there, but I mean, I just can't see how it's going to work in London. I wish it could.
Okay, great. I mean, that'll be a lot of work, but there are lots of resources for supervisors, which I will show you shortly. Will the TPD for ST4s be the same TPD for ST1 and ST3s?
Yeah, so we've got in London, we've got 7 program management TPDs, and they're going to all stay working. They work very, very, very hard indeed, but we'll end up with 8 really, if we include and for grid. Anyway, but yes, we're going to be we're going to be ending up with Sunita and Kum looking after the back half of ST3 and ST4, and our current crew of level 1s looking after the first part of training.
The main thing is we'll let you know, and it'll update on the website as to who's being TPD for which grade. So you have someone to contact at all stages, but everyone is really lovely to contact about any stage, to be fair. Right, how can we support trainees without impacting on patient outcomes? Jonathan?
I think that's just too vague a question, actually. I'm sorry.
It's a hard question.
It's a really good question, a really hard one, but we're going to short a time, and it's not.
So refer to the FAQ document because Jonathan has answered that earlier. Okay, so next, I think this one is also a very good question. How to support those trainees transitioning between current curriculum and Progress Plus in their portfolio requirements if there are changes to what is completed at different stages. Emma?
So like I said before, there is changes because we are restructuring 3 years into 2, but we haven't really changed the content. We've just kind of we basically had to move level 2 into either core or specialty in terms of the capabilities. It's all on the website to view, so just have a look and see. There's that slight change of emphasis with a bit more emphasis on kind of child and adolescent mental health and public health and integrated health. But this is stuff we do in our jobs every day, all the time. So you're already getting that experience. You can already start evidencing it. And I really don't think it's going to be a huge change in terms of curriculum and evidencing stuff. It's all there to see. And as I said before, all your learning will be pulled across. So don't worry about losing anything you're doing at the moment.
So for supervisors, just make sure you also read the Progress Plus curriculum so that you are savvy with it. Okay, so homework for everyone. How would we support trainees who don't wish to be reg at ST3? Very good question.
So like we've mentioned, there's going to be this readiness for tier 2 assessment that all trainees will have to go through. So if a trainee feels that they're really, really not ready for whatever reason, then they are part of that assessment. I think Jonathan made a very valid point. I don't think anyone ever feels completely ready to step up, and sometimes you need to be in that situation. But the idea is with this is that you will be in that situation initially in a very supported environment, perhaps in daytime hours with a consultant or a reg around supervising you, so you can start to get that confidence. So hopefully if people start getting supported to do that during ST2 and then ST3, they will feel more confident and ready to step up. The other point to make is that in London, we're quite lucky. In a lot of the country in paediatrics, ST3s are registrars already. So this happens already all over the place. It's just in London that we're not used to doing this. So they've proved in other places that, that it can work. And hopefully, I think the important thing is that we don't suddenly get ST3s and say, right, off you go, be a reg. We need to do it in a supported way. And I think that happens in a lot of places, that people are given opportunities to step up and supported in that transition. But that's the important bit, is that people are doing it in a supported way, and then hopefully they will feel confident. But there will be this assessment for readiness. And if somebody is really not happy, then they'll say that. And then there should be a kind of a conversation about what more support they need so that they will be able to feel ready, and that learning is supported.
And it's probably fair to say that you're obviously not going to actually progress in training unless you actually become a registrar at some point. So it's bleeding obvious, isn't it? The other thing about this is if you look around other industries, you find that people, we're talking about people around sort of 28, they're really bright, they're really focused on their careers. They've worked very hard to get where they are already. Okay, and they've already done, usually around at this stage, around 10 years of learning after school. Okay, that's a lot of stuff that people have learned. And actually, to some extent, we rather infantilize, if that's a word, our trainees and not really let them progress in perhaps the way that they'd be ready to do. And if you think about what like a young architect might be doing, or someone in the banking and finance world or something like that. So yeah, we're very happy with this. And Nisha's telling me to
I'm
shut up.
telling
Let's
him
move
about
on
the
to the
time.
next one.
I'm just doing this to him.
important.
It's a really
Nisha,
valid.
it's
It's a
really
really
important.
valid
Yeah,
point.
let's
I
go on to the
completely
next
agree,
question.
but we need to crack on. Right, OOPs,
Oh,
out
nice.
of practice, out of program,
Out of
out of
practice.
practice, out of program. And I have a feeling this is when we say goodbye to Emma, because she is off to her night shift.
Thank you
So
much,
just to say a big thank you, because she came in last minute to give her amazing talk. I'm sure we all learned lots from her, and her talk has been recorded and will be available on the YouTube channel soon. I'm sure she'll appreciate some feedback as well, which will be in the feedback form. Thank you so much for all your wisdom and pearls, as always, Emma. I hope the night shift is kind to you, and I hope it's your last one as well, so you can get some rest tomorrow.
Thank you, and thanks for having me. Yeah, it's great to keep talking about this and ask lots of questions. Thanks, everybody.
No problem. Take care. Bye. Right, so out of program.
You sound like you were echoing. Were you echoing?
No, we're echoing because of your
sorry, yeah,
headphones.
Okay.
Sorry, so this will be edited before we put it up. So Jonathan, some more questions for you. How will there be more opportunities for OOPs compared to the current setup, and will it affect your OOP opportunity if we're moving away from a time-based training program? Will there be a limit on how many OOPs you can take?
Okay, so really good question, because actually people love OOPs, don't they? We're very keen on OOPs too. The scene in London actually were miles ahead of the rest of the country in terms of how many OOPs. So this is kind of a direction not for the for London, but for the rest of the UK. Many trainees don't take any OOPs at all, though, even in London, and we're very keen that people do to explore, different aspects of paediatrics, different aspects of life for what it's worth. And there's lots of different OOPs that can be set up for doing that. We're very keen to let people do OOPs. There are a few stipulations. Some of them are set by our program, and some are also set by what's called the Gold Guide, which is the kind of Bible or Quran or whatever of training. You have to look very carefully at it, and there are limits within that. So yes, there will be limits. Like for instance, you're only allowed 12 months of OOP E, 24 months of OOP C, for instance, that sort of thing.
So thanks very much, Jonathan. And the Gold Guide he refers to, there's a link at the bottom of this slide. So next,
that's light reading.
It's very interesting reading. As someone who has taken both an OOP and an OOP-C, please do read through it, because the rules will continue to follow the Gold Guide.
Yeah.
What happens if you take time out of training? That's what TOT stands for anyone who didn't know. Mid-current level 2 at the transition point.
So it's, two. It's actually usually two. T-O-O-T. Anyway,
it is time out of training.
There's two. Anyway, there was someone actually put a really interesting question in the chat line, which I tried to answer about this. And the scenario here was that you were a current. No, you're just about to go into ST4, and then you took an OOP at the moment of transition. Okay, and so you actually didn't get to finish old school level 2, but you came back having the progress plus. That's a really, really unusual situation. There'll probably be about 3 people that applies to. If that's the situation, we'll have to think quite carefully with you and do it on an individual basis. So I think that's what. Otherwise, it's just going to be very straightforward. It's only for the people moving from the core curriculum to the sub-spec curriculum where this could be a particular issue.
Amazing. So although most of this is general, some people will have individualized plans, especially these little cohort here. How does this affect trainees who may want to work from a time abroad? So I'm going to interrupt Jonathan so I can say this quickly. It's not going to affect you. We can move on to the next page now. I have to sometimes rein Jonathan in from his very long chats. So the academic section is next. So how
we've got
will
Sandia here. Sandia's here, isn't she?
So how will this fit in?
Can you enable Sandia to talk? Because she might want to add to this.
Yeah, so hold on. So how will this fit in with trainees wishing to apply for an ACF during ST2 and 3? Now, I'll let Jonathan start because it's going to take me a little while to find Sandia.
So first of all, the academic programme, it's a total jewel in London. It's fantastic here, what we can actually do. And we're aiming to keep it going pretty much exactly as is. Academic sort of slots in on top of whatever other training there is. So you can change your curriculum however you liked, and you would still get ACFs and clinical lecturers doing their thing. You can apply pretty much any time at the beginning of training, so ST1, 2 or 3, and later on for clinical lecturers if you've already been down that route, depending on criteria. And then you just do training at the same time, but also do the academic elements on top of that. ACFs will still be 3 years in length. And so that sounds like it's going to go across the transition point, but that was already the case. You know, we have some ACFs who are in ST4 at the moment, and so they've gone across a rota transition point. So we're very excited about that. Sandy, is Sandy able to speak?
Sandy, I've made you presenter if you wanted to add anything.
Did you want to add anything to that?
Hi, everyone. Just to say, to be honest, like what we've heard before, it shouldn't change much because ACFs at the moment, the level has always been ST1, 2, 4. So it's basically always been that level. And ACLs will be the latter stage. So it shouldn't affect your training. And the current ACFs, it's always been capability based because essentially they've had to get their clinical competencies in slightly less time anyway in order for them to do their academic component. So for those who are interested in applying, it shouldn't have any bearing on it.
Thanks so much, Sandia, for the little cameo. I didn't know we were expecting you today, which is great.
Always
so
exciting.
I've actually joined as a trainee.
So asking all the questions, eh?
You want some more progress, do you?
Right. So we are now going to go through each level of training. So level 1 training. So can one of my presenters let all the people into the lobby because I can't keep going through both. Thank you very much. Right. So level 1 training. So for those finishing ST1 in September 2023, how will future level 1, ST2, ST3 posts be allocated? Do we get choice? Do we get ranked again?
Now, I don't think we have any of our level 1 TPD placement. Okay, I thought not. So what people who have came in this year will have noticed come in this year will have noticed that actually we only were able to release the first job, which is a bit of what we'd release at least 2, maybe even 3 years. What we found was it was complete fiction, particularly the last year, because so many people moved around. So it's not actually that worthwhile doing that for most people. Only about a third of people actually ended up doing the job that they expected in ST3. So we weren't actually able to even put out 2 years because actually the system was in flux at the time that we had to submit the ST1 jobs. But what we got is some fairly clear principles. We're now pretty much sorted out on exactly where everybody will go. Everyone's going to be staying fairly local to where they are. They'll be going to their local teaching hospital, and then we'll be returning back usually to their DGH where they started for their transition point. So that's roughly where things are going. Contact your TPD, your placement TPD, for more details of that. That's roughly how the rotations are going to be going long term as well. So starting off in a DGH in one sector of your area of London, and then rotating to a nearby teaching hospital, and then back. Most people will go into 2 or 3 trusts in maximum in the first 3 years of or 4 years of their training. 1 or 2 will have to go to slightly more hospitals than that. Quite a few will only be in 2. So this should be relatively good in terms of continuity and experience too.
Great. So the next question, I'm actually going to skip because we've already addressed this in terms of OOPS. And as I said before, most of the information is in the Gold Guide, which we will continue to be following. You can also find the answer in the FAQs. Right, so by which point in level 1 training will we need to choose whether we continue Gen Peds or enter grid subspeciality training?
Yeah, I might bring in Anne actually to answer some of these questions here. But I'll just start off while Anne's kind of getting getting it in gear. What point? Well, at the moment, to actually get into grids, you need to actually have a bit of planning beforehand. You need to accumulate some experience. You need to show that you're actually really going to be very good for that, because most of our grids are actually competitive, and you actually have to show that you're better than the other people that have bothered to turn up for the interview. So sooner rather than later. But on the other hand, you don't want to choose something that you don't really know about. So you actually have to go around a little bit. So what I'd suggest is don't do anything really in ST1. In ST2, start thinking about it and making inquiries and exploring things as you get to know a little bit more about how paediatrics actually functions. And did you want to add to that at all?
I think you're right, that thinking about it sort of halfway through level 1, because you can actually request, if possible, a subspecialty placement in your core training and to explore the specialty, and actually think really carefully about using your outer program to learn more about the specialty. I know the document from the college talks about tasters. Sorry, that's my niece. My 2-year-old niece is screaming in the background. I apologize. So they talk about tasters, and I think it's quite difficult. I know foundation trainees do them, but I don't know that we've got enough wiggle room in the program. Potentially, it's something that trainees can think about doing, but using your outer program. Then it's whether you want to go for a first grid recruitment, go at your ST4 year or in your ST4 year. I would advise that, as Jonathan said, a little bit of work, speak to trainees who are doing the subspecialty already, speak to the CSACs who are very helpful. They are CSAC advisors for all subspecialties, and they're very keen to speak to future colleagues. So really just start to do a bit of homework, and then booking for a TCM as well.
And TCM, for anyone who doesn't know, is a trainee contact meeting. There's information about this on the website. I'll include the link in the FAQ as well. So next, what I'm going to do, just in the interest of time, is let's tackle the topic of fast tracking. Awesome. So fast tracking for every level, because there is a question about fast tracking in every level question. So Jonathan, do you want to talk about fast tracking?
Okay, so first thing to say is that this curriculum is competency based. Okay, so theoretically, you could do no time at all and still get a CCT, but obviously that's not going to happen. The college actually hasn't released precise things around fast tracking. We expect there will be some fast tracking possible at both in core and in the specialist training, but we really don't know any more details than that at the moment, and actually how that will work out. So I'm sorry about that. That was a pretty crap answer. At least it was short.
Yeah, I think we had some more information about fast tracking for more senior levels further down in our FAQ documents. So if you want to refer to that, unless Jonathan wants to refer to that now, we'll wait for the questions.
The subspec bit, I'm sure we'll end up being only able to do 2 of the 3 years, should you wish to. So you could effectively CCT at the end of ST6, should you wish to.
ST7. Six.
So you'd finish at the end of ST6, you could potentially do that. But quite how it works out in the kind of fairly busy core curriculum, I don't know. Certainly for those who come in having got some experience already, you'd probably be ready to move up to that middle grade rota much earlier than had been planned at sort of ST3.5. So
just quickly, I think the bottom line is that it's a conversation you need to have with your ES, and there is a fast tracking form that you need to complete. So have a conversation with your ES, let your TPD know, complete your fast tracking form, submit it and put it on your e-portfolio.
So just to also add to that, the fast tracking form is something different to the college. That is a London School of Paediatrics fast tracking form. So if you are a London trainee, well, I know we've got some externals here today, then London needs the fast tracking form filled out by your educational supervisor and a discussion with your TPD in order to allow fast tracking. The fast tracking form can be found on the website, the London School of Paediatrics website, which I will also include the link for in this document. Right, level 2 training. So after ST4, can you apply for jobs pan London? If South trainee can apply for trainees, North London jobs. And Shanti is nodding her head. So that's going to be a quick question answer there. You can apply pan London. Great news. Right.
It's a pan London specialist program.
It's a pan London specialty program, and it will continue to stay that way when you enter at the end of ST4, entering into your 5, 6 and 7. Is 6 months of each community and neonate still a requirement for core registrar training? I think we've already spoken about this a little bit.
So yeah, I mean, just to very briefly just say that every trainee will get will be doing a 6-month block in neonates and community between the start of their program and the end of ST4. That's because both of them are really essential parts of actually being a paediatrician, and we don't feel that you're going to be able to complete the curricular requirements without that. You do not need to do that in any particular time and as a core registrar, 100% no.
Great. Right, next question. So, my screen is covered. What is the effect on joining training and ST4 level? So I think some people are wondering about entry level applications. So a bit more about that.
Yeah, so the college is going to be recruiting at ST1, possibly ST2, ST4, and then maybe ST5 at the moment. We currently have an ST4 entry for people who've done quite a bit elsewhere or had some interesting career maneuvers. Well, I mean, it's exactly the same. You come in on the Progress Plus curriculum, and after a year, you're meant to have completed your core competencies. If you haven't, then we'll work out some way for some more time.
The next question is, I think
the issue is, sorry, I was just going to add that the issue will be, that was discussed at the heads of school CSAC meeting, would be if that trainee wanted to do subspecialty training. So it needs to be very early identification and discussion, but hopefully that trainee will know and raise that.
Right. So the next question seems not to be related to...
We've got a matching question already. Yeah.
And we had matching already, so we might skip this. But
Shanti, I mean, maybe you can just talk a little bit about matching. Do you want to talk about the matching process?
Shanti, shall I go on to the level 3 and then you can answer all the questions? Yeah,
I will try.
Sorry. Right. So we've got a few more level 2.
Well, yeah, we've done some of these already.
Sorry, I think we have done these. How will ST3s transition? We've done that. I will have done a community job. How do we ensure we won't repeat? I think we've also covered that. If you're only doing 12 months of ST4, do you get to choose 2 out of the 3 in Gen Peds neonates? And we've covered that. And we've also covered what changes does it have in terms of moving on to middle tier rota.
It just has a tiny bit around the choosing subspecialties, because we're quite keen that our trainees get a choice of ability to go and do a subspecialty right at the beginning of their career in paediatrics. So again, that's something that will be done by your placement TPD in conjunction with the trainee, so that everyone knows what's going on and there is some choice in that. It's not completely unlimited choice, but there will be some choice at that stage.
And so whilst we're on the topic of that and matching, and Shanti can probably also answer this, is that will the matching be done via matching forms from what level upwards? And as Anne and you have always told me, put as much information on your matching form as possible to ensure that our lovely program management TPDs can place you appropriately. So maybe Shanti, you could answer a little bit more about that.
So yes, absolutely. So the question about if you don't have your SD4 place yet, yes, it will be in the matching round, and it will be Kum and Sunita who will be matching you for SD4, and similarly for your subspecialty years, the last 3 years, it will be done through matching, and it will be myself and Atifa. We do try and take into account your experience to date, your career aspirations, and all the other requests, but bearing in mind, we also keep in mind that what your specific training needs are. That will change a little bit with slightly more greater emphasis on general paediatrics within the level 3 program, in keeping with Progress Plus for your general paediatric CCT trainees, but the matching itself will remain within the matching windows.
Great, thank you so much for that clarity. Now we're going to move on to level 3 questions.
I should just quickly say that subspecialty trainees don't match. The subspecialty trainees is about the requirements of the subspecialty training program. Obviously, that choice does not, well, really exist because of the requirements of training and the few training centres we have. So it's that only applies to the non-specialty trainees.
But just to add to that, as you mentioned earlier, Anne, if you know that your timing for grid is short and that you'd like a potential grid approved post that you should put, well, because you're going to apply for subspecialty training later or that year, then you should ask for that on your matching form so that you could potentially get a 6-month placement. But as Anne has said previously, the maximum you can get is
12 months.
12 months.
Great, perfect. Thanks. Before I said it and it was wrong. Okay, right.
That's no different from current.
Yeah, so that's the same as now. So I'm going to skip the first question because actually that answer should be on the RCPCH slides. The next question is what happens to trainees about to enter level 3? Can we CCT at ST7 if we want to?
Well, first of all, you're living in the past. What is this level 3? Subspecialty training. Oh, you're about to enter it right now. Okay. Well, yes. Never seen so much nodding. Thanks, Shanti. Yeah, of course you can, because that you can fast track, because you'll be going in, you'll be about to become an ST6. The next year you'll be an ST7. You can fast track if you want to.
That's when Progress starts, which is great.
I think that question there is trying to escape Progress Plus.
Yeah, basically. Great. So what does this mean for those currently in ST7 with a CCT date in March 2024, but planning fast track the last 6 months? Shanti?
Nothing.
Get in touch with us. Nothing. You stay on Progress, and you will CCT. It is fast tracking, so you'll need to do the appropriate paperwork. But get in touch.
Yeah. Fast track form on the website.
And start remediation.
Yeah. Start.
And reflection.
Start.
Whole evening's going out of control. Now, the key thing here is that date. Remember the 15th of September 2024. Okay, if you're still in program on that date for wherever you are then a Progress Plus trainee. Okay.
15th September 2024. That is the date to know.
Which
right.
Answers the next question.
Our next question is answered by exactly that date. So thank you very much, Jonathan. We're going to move on now.
So really, whatever the cause is, even if you kind of less than full-time OOP or whatever, everyone becomes
Progress Plus on 15th of September 2024. So if you're still a trainee, then your Progress Plus is coming to you.
We've not been drinking, honestly.
No, we haven't actually. Not yet. Right. A very important question coming up. Will this create a bottleneck for consultant posts?
Oh, well, this will be even less of a bottleneck than we might be experiencing earlier on, which I don't think will in practice be a catastrophic bottleneck at all. Particularly in the context that for many specialties, actually, there are consultant vacancies. The reason we see a lot of people actually waiting around for, as post-CCT fellows is partly actually because they just want a bit more experience in different things, but also they're waiting for an ideal job to come up. So, it's always a question. If you want a specific job in a specific hospital, you might have to wait a very, very long time indeed. If you're a bit less your requirements are slightly lower, then that won't be such an issue. There will be slightly more consultants coming out in the next 2 or 3 years as a result as Progress works through. But after a while, we'll be back to steady state again.
Great. So the next question I'm going to answer very quickly. And so it would be
actually dwarfed by other changes that will be happening, for instance, changes in the healthcare budget. So there we go.
Great.
Sorry about
Thank
that.
you very much, Jonathan. So is there a plan to add more start assessment dates? So I believe that the college is planning to do that.
Is that
So
right? There we go.
yeah,
You believe
apparently. So we're going to move on now to our next question. So general post questions. Now, some of these we may have already answered in all of our amazing TPD discussions that we've had. So I'll briefly go through these. So I think we have covered the first one. Noting scrapping of requirement for 6-month blocks. What is the likely rotation pattern during core training? I think Jonathan answered this earlier.
Well,
so
yeah, no
we're gonna skip that.
The college is saying we don't need. Sorry, I know. Sorry.
No, we're not.
Nisha's telling me to hurry up. But I think it's really important. The college is saying we don't have to stick to 6-month blocks, but we actually have to run a program as well with a large number of trainees, with hospitals and things. And is there an advantage of going to shorter blocks? Well, I think if you talk to FYs, they might say no, there isn't, because actually you never quite get into a job in a 4-month period. So we're not planning to do that.
So the next question, when's the earliest the registrar can be allocated a rotation in grid? Which we have already answered. I believe the answer is ST5. So what happens to training sites who have a lot of ST7s and 8s? Shanti, would you like to answer this one?
So the subspecialty, so the last 3 years remain the same. So your ST6 to 8s currently will then be ST5s to 7. There won't be much change.
Lovely, short and concise. I love your answers, Shanti, in comparison to someone here on my right. Right, so now we are getting on to less than full-time training. So because I am not an expert in this, although I am a less than full-time training trainee, I have brought in some expert hands, which is our amazing subgroup lead. So we have a less than full-time subgroup in our committee, and our lead is Kate Quinnen. She is an ST8 currently, and she is going to take over talking now. I am hoping I can spotlight her, so bear with me whilst I just spotlight her instead of my face, which would be nice, wouldn't it? And then I will let her take over. Spotlight for everyone. Now, does this mean that you can't see the slides? Maybe it might.
Can people see the slides still? We can still see them.
You can.
Yeah.
Oh, great. Jonathan can't, but Shanti can. Can everyone else still see the slides? Just in the chat. Yes.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. We can.
Great.
Great. Thanks, Katie. Good. Anyway, thank you, Nisha. I'm definitely not going to call myself an expert, but I have been a less than full-time trainee for a long time and have a brilliant group behind me as well. So we've been in conjunction with our lovely TPDs trying to answer the many questions we've had from the less than full-time trainees across London, of which we have many of us. So Nisha, would you mind moving the slides on? I think we got so many questions and they were really often very niche and very specific. So, but there were themes that were coming out. So what we're going to try and do is quickly whip through a few kind of case studies that we've come up with, which kind of give the answer to many of the questions that we had. But every trainee is an individual. Everyone will have slightly different circumstances. I think the main message here is please speak to your educational supervisor, please speak to your college tutor, and if that is not being answered, please go to your TPD via a trainee contact meeting on the HEE portal. But first of all, try and speak to your educational supervisor and your college tutors, because they might be able to help you. So many questions about our less than full-time ST4 trainees. So we've come up with these kind of scenarios for you. So say you're an ST4 trainee, you're working at 60% and you starting ST4 in September 2022, so about to start ST4 at 60% now, or maybe you're not going to start it till March. And then you had a few questions about this. So remember that less than full-time training works in whole-time equivalent. So if you're working at 60%, you'll have only done 7.2 months, or indeed just 3.6 months whole-time equivalent ST4 when Progress Plus comes in next September. So you will not have had time to achieve core competencies. So you're going to remain in core training as an ST4 from September 2023. But again, do have an early discussion with your educational supervisor. So what about those who maybe started ST4 a little bit earlier? So maybe they started in March 2022. We had a question about this as well. So again, thinking about your whole time equivalent, you'll have done 10.8 months whole time equivalent when Progress Plus comes in. So you have a choice, a bit like the other kind of ST4s out there. You have a choice to make here. I think we feel that probably the majority of trainees in this circumstance will choose to remain in core training as an ST4 from September 2023, because they still won't have done kind of 12 months working as a registrar. But some people might have had opportunities already to act up in ST3. They might have previously done an UP or a fellowship. They might have other experience. So if you have achieved your core competencies and you passed your RCPCH clinical, you might be in a position to progress to specialty training in September 2023. So again, speak to your educational supervisor first. One that I think with the new kind of level 3 category less than full-time trainees we have, which is becoming more common, are ST4 trainees who are working at 80%, of which we have a few who will be starting at ST4 this September. So you will have done 9.6 months whole time equivalent of ST4 when Progress Plus comes in. So you are likely to remain in core training as an ST4 from next September, because for the majority of trainees, you will not have achieved your core competencies with only 9.6 months of whole time equivalent registrar level working. But again, if you've done fellowships, if you had taken opportunities to act up in ST3, then, and you passed your clinical exam, then you might be in a position, but you need to discuss this with your educational supervisor. I think the key is to be proactive, to make sure that you know what the core competencies are in the curriculum and start trying to evidence these from now, really, if you haven't already in your portfolios, so that you can hit the ground running. So
Sorry, Kate, can I also just add to this, which is that not only should the trainees do that, but if you are a supervisor sitting here or a college tutor, can you be mindful that those who haven't come and may not be aware of this, can you highlight this to your less than full-time trainees and all trainees, so that they are aware of their career planning that they need to get on top of, basically. Thanks, Kate, sorry to interject. This is
no, that's great, because again, all of the kind of examples, because it's too complicated to give less than full-time examples, but all of the examples are kind of based on whole-time workers. So just we need to think in terms of whole-time equivalent months here. So we've had a few questions about our higher level less than full-time trainees, and I think actually hopefully we've answered this, so I can be very quick. So thinking about an ST7 less than full-time trainee who's actually been a higher trainee on the progress curriculum since they started ST6 in September 2020, and they're due to move to ST8 in September 2023, which is when Progress Plus is coming in, and they're planning on working at 70%. So their provisional CCT date is March 2025. And we've already mentioned this key date to you. This is the 15th of September 2024. So this is at the point at which everybody will be on the Progress Plus curriculum. So you cannot stay on the Progress curriculum. So this trainee isn't due to CCT until 6 months after this. So what are they going to do? And I think there are two options. I think hopefully we've reassured you during this evening that actually it will be okay for this trainee to move to the Progress Plus curriculum next September for the remaining 1.5 years of training. Because as we said, Progress Plus is more of a change of emphasis rather than any new content, and all of their evidencing that they've been evidencing for their level 3 since September 2020 will be moved across, will be ported across when they move to the new curriculum. So that's one option. Another option is that they could stay on the Progress curriculum and aim to CCT before that 15th of September 2024 deadline. But to do that, they'd either need to move back up to full-time training, or if their educational supervisor thinks that they are able to do so, then they'd need to fast track, and they'd need to do exactly as I said before, have these conversations in advance, fill out the fast tracking form with their educational supervisor, upload their portfolio, and contact their TPD. So hopefully that's kind of highlighted what would happen in that circumstance with ST7. Right, if we move on, Nisha, if you don't mind.
I think Jonathan just wanted to add something.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I think one thing you brought out is it's a little bit more complicated, but actually isn't really that much more complicated. because really, I mean, it's just like the academics, it's exactly the same curriculum. It's just that the word time and month has a slightly different meaning for less than full-time trainee, and it doesn't necessarily fit into those kind of click slots of September and March that we love so much. You know, we just have to be a bit more thoughtful about it. And but it's usually fairly obvious once you realise that it doesn't fit into those click slots.
Yeah, and I think this is what this slide is kind of highlighting as well, that it doesn't fit into click slots, because lots of people, and not just our less than full-time trainees, have winter ARCPs. And again, we've had questions about this because all the RCPCH examples are talking about summer ARCPs, or saying they're finishing FT levels in summer 2023, but we are aware that that does not apply to a lot of our trainees in London. So the kind of example we've got, which again was kind of asked in our questions, is an FT5 trainee who's working at 60%, who is going to start FT5 in March, so 2023. So before Progress Plus comes in, so that's 6 months before Progress Plus comes in. So they won't be having an ARCP in the summer. Their next one is due in winter 2024. So they'll have already actually done quite a lot of core training when Progress Plus comes in, over 15 months of whole-time equivalent when Progress Plus comes in September 2023. So again, this trainee has a choice to make, but it's likely that they've probably achieved their core competencies and they're actually ready to progress to specialty training. So again, people in this circumstance, again, should be discussing with their educational supervisor early, because if they do want to progress to specialty training, then there might be the option for an additional summer ARCP. But otherwise, they'll just still be ported over to Progress Plus, and then they can become a specialty trainee ST5 in winter 2024. So hopefully that's kind of explained a little bit more. It's really difficult because everybody's got their own niche kind of circumstances, as we've seen in the chat here. And I think the key message is just think about who you speak to, try and find the information yourself, speak to your educational supervisor, speak to your college teacher. If you need further help, then get a trainee contact meeting.
Thank you so much, Kate. I think that's been really clear and really concise about less than full time, but also given a good overview of everyone's training, really, because so many of us are less than full time as well. Thank you so much for your time here. I'm not sure if you have any more questions. If you don't have any more questions for in the next section, thank you so much for joining us today, and for spending the time sorting these case studies out yesterday while she was in Isle of Wight on holiday, where she has this beautiful tan I can see. So I hope you had a nice holiday and your kids are behaving.
Thank you. No, they're having a great time, but Lord knows what my sitting room looks like, so I might go and sort that out. But thank you. And yes, if anyone has any queries, just remember as well that we are here as a subgroup and we can hopefully help as well. So please do contact us. All of the details are on the website.
So again, London School of Paediatrics website, go to the less than full time page and their email addresses are there, but don't bombard them all at once if possible. There are a couple of them, Rosie and both Kate and Rachel, I believe. Right, so this, when I was going through the questions, was what I call the hard questions. So we may brief over these quite quickly because some of them weren't very relevant,
well,
but some of them were very
some of them are very relevant, but not to Progress Plus, because they're totally,
I mean, some of them I took out earlier because I didn't feel they were relevant.
Where's the cheapest petrol in South London? Yeah.
Right, so let's get started. Okay. So first and foremost, what is the impact on workforce for neonatology? What is London's strategy?
We've kind of covered this a little bit already. So the numbers are set by NHSE, or the executive there, and then eventually and what they work with the CSACs to filter down what's actually how many people we need to train, and then they tell Health Education England and we create places. So but broadly, no major plans for change in broadly most of these subspecialties.
Great. So how is the college supporting attempts to recruit more middle grade doctors?
Yeah, no, it's quite an interesting issue there, but it's going to take too long to actually answer that particular question. We're really keen to have people coming in there, but the problem is space. And then Meanwhile, you look around and you think, well, actually, there's loads of gaps here in this middle grade rota. And that actually relates more to Health Education England. We can't recruit people into places where that gap actually has someone in it, but they're actually on maternity leave or on OOP and things. Now, I make the point that actually we've always got, like, say, about 100 people out of programs. So why don't we recruit, say, 50 more, and we won't get into trouble? Anyway, that's a discussion for me and my colleagues here at Health Education England, but I haven't got to the end of that yet, sorry.
Amazing. So I can see that a few people are leaving. If possible, I'm going to email you all the feedback form. We're nearly done, so please stay till the end, because I'd really like you all to fill out the feedback. Anyway, our next question is really important. Half of our PEDS admissions in the pandemic were mental health issues. Can you expand on how PEDS and CAMS might overlap in training to improve training in mental health as a subspecialty?
Okay, well, so first, that's not really super Progress Plus, but one of the emphasis that Progress Plus has over Progress is more child mental health and adolescent medicine. So there will be more competencies and capabilities around those domains in your Progress Plus curriculum, which is very appropriate. I lost the question now. What are we doing? We actually haven't got, we've been making very slow progress about actually having joint jobs for a number of different reasons, but we hope to have in the next 12 months some OOP style jobs that you might be able to take up that a small number of people could go forward in.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Jonathan. And lovely Tom is going to put in the feedback form there. The question about CSER trainees is actually going to be answered in the FAQ document, yep. So have a look there, because I realised that we're already at 8 o'clock. So these are questions about shortening training and why we're doing it, and do we have enough evidence to believe that ST3 trainees have enough experience?
Yeah, we've
spoken about that one, yeah. But I guess the question why.
Whole year off training. I know, I love this question. I don't know who provided it, but it was just so eloquently written. How can you do that? Well, actually, I mean, the question is really what you're trying to get to, and you know, how quickly you're trying to get there. If you go around the world, you find very different patterns of training. Now, you might say, well, yeah, German doctors aren't really very good paediatricians after 4 years. Well, they're not that much worse, to be honest. And what about in America? Well, they do more hours, don't they? You know, and you have this kind of knockabout type of argument. I think the key thing to recognise is you don't have to be some sort of super paediatrician with a cape at when you reach CCT. You're still learning. You still have to ask people stuff. And it doesn't get to a place when you're kind of finished ever. I mean, I'm still learning stuff every time I go into work. So the question is, what are you meant to look like at CCT? Is that getting watered down? Well, we strongly believe that's not the case, because actually the emphasis here on in Progress Plus is that actually the training will actually be more concentrated and better in the training sites. We've actually got our school fellow, that's Nadir, who's starting in September. One of his major roles will be working with individual trusts to get better training for trainees. So actually there's a better delivery of that. And I think we've seen gradual improvement in the quality of trainees over the last 10 years, and we expect that to continue.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. So I think we are finished.
Hey, how about that?
So
we actually finished.
That was a really great summary. And Nadir is actually in the audience, I believe. Okay. So he might be able to come.
Did you know you were about to do that, Nadir?
So he might have had a bit of a shock there, but you'll be hearing a lot more from him. And you'll meet him all at future LSP events as well. He'll also be helping us on our conference committee, which will be in March next year as well. So lots more from Nadir soon. Right, so that comes to the end of our FAQs. Now, this is your moment. If you have any other questions that you would like us to address, put them in your chat now. We will not address them at this moment, but lovely Tom, my treasurer and current school fellow, is jotting all those questions down onto our FAQ document so that we can provide a massive document for you. Now, if your questions are too basic and are already covered in the RCPCH talk, or also just the basic knowledge of how the shape of training is, we will not answer them. However, if they are a bit more complicated, as long as they're not individualized, they will be answered as well. As I said in all my emails, this is about a general approach, not about an individual person's pathway. If you will need individual advice, again, please ask educational supervisors, college tutors when you rotate in September. Bring it up in your first induction meeting, and if you're both struggling with how that will pan out for your Progress Plus life, then please ask one of the TPDs, and trainee contact meetings have been discussed for those people who have very individual plans. But first port of call is your college tutors and educational supervisors. Right, guys, that's your QR code for the FAQ document. You'll also get an email about it, and it'll also be on the website soon. Key resources. So another QR code, because I'm a QR fan. This is the page for the London School of Paediatrics website, which has a massive section on shape of training. It has all the information you need on it with regards to how it affects you. It has the RCPCH slides that we saw from Emma earlier. It's also got a bit of information about ARCP and is soon to have the FAQ document on it. The FAQ document will be available to you in the next 2 weeks, because you have to give me some time to do some editing and bits and pieces. And the recording of tonight, lovely Nick Prince, one of our TPDs, is going to edit this lovely evening tonight and upload it onto our YouTube channel. Again, it takes a long time, so hopefully in the next 2 weeks you'll have all of it there. Make sure you've taken your QR code there to take you to the shape of training part of our LSP website. Then the RCPCH web resources. So Emma spoke a lot about this. There are loads and loads of resources. She spoke about all of these. The only one she didn't talk about was, I'm an educational supervisor. How do I support my trainees? RCPCH have created a great video. I think it's about 15 minutes long. It's right there, and it gives you loads of advice for all you supervisors and college tutors out there of how to support trainees through this transition. So please do look at that. Again, these will all be on the FAQ document and are also on the website on the earlier QR code.
Can we just before, hold on, Nisha, can we thank Nisha? She's put this together. Okay, this is really, really wonderful that she's done that. This looks like a trainee-led thing. It is a trainee-led thing, because she's put it all together and brought everyone in, and including myself. So thank you so much, Nisha.
Thanks, Jonathan. And thank you to you and all of our other TPDs and Kate and Emma for taking the time out tonight.